Hello, everybody. Welcome to this edition of the Rare Book Cafe, the coffee break edition with my co-host, Lee Linn. Good morning.
Good morning, Ed. And where are you today?
Well, I happen to be in Connecticut. I was doing some personal business on the East Coast. And unfortunately, the only place I could find the broadcast room today was a casino.
Ah!
So I have no idea what I'm going to do once this is over.
Well, I hope you don't lose all your money.
So do my children.
Yes.
I want to just sit here sucking down a little bit of coffee because we are the coffee break edition of Rare Book Cafe.
That's right. And I have a cup this morning. This is from Emory University, the Barkley Debate Forum. And I hope next week I'll have a bag from the Calhoun Coffee Company. We do have a coffee roaster here in Calhoun. But, you know, it'll kind of be like your attempts at other sponsorships. But
okay.
We can have
Well,
a bag.
I would like to point out that today I'm sucking down a Starbucks. And I also would like to point out that Starbucks is also not a sponsor of the show. But if they know what's good for them, they're going to pony up a little bit of sponsorship money to help support one of the premier book podcasting, video casting shows on the internet today. You can find us every single week, folks, with at least one and sometimes two new episodes on Facebook and on YouTube. Welcome, everybody.
We're so glad to have everyone back today.
Yes, indeed. Well, Lee, last week I got a call from a book collector in his mid-80s, as many book collectors have been, saying it's time for me to downsize my books. So I drove on over to visit him and see what he had, and he had over 4,500 books neatly arranged on the shelves. Yeah, big, and he'd read all of them. That was his personal reading collection. But most of them were trade books and not something that would fit well into my business. But I asked him before I left, as I ask all my customers, do you have anything else interesting made out of papers? Do you have any letters, any diaries, any ephemera? And he goes, well, I do have some letters from, sorry, dropped my headphone. He did say, well, I do have some letters from my grandfather that he wrote to Ezra Pound. And my eyes said, well, do you mind if we take a look at them?
Yeah.
And before the afternoon was over, I bought myself a little archive of Ezra Pound letters and also letters from Dorothy Pound. Alan, can you bring that up for us? Why don't you bring that slide up all the way, Alan? As you can see in the bottom photo here, it's a series of letters, 5 letters from his wife, 4 letters from Ezra Pound, to Herman Spencer. Now, you and I don't know who Herman Spencer is, and I had a heck of a time Googling him on the internet. But Herman Spencer was Ezra Pound middle school Greek, Latin, and Shakespeare professor from 1899 to 1902 at Cheltenham Military Academy in Pennsylvania. And you'll see here a photo of him in his uniform with his mother. And over on the right side, you'll see a photo of him as a teenager with his trademark shock of electrified hair, shall we say. And the very first sentence in the letter opens as follows. Dear Herman, if I remember rightly, you were the first man I heard recite Homer in the original Greek.
Whoa.
And yeah, and I think that's where Ezra Pound got his love for foreign classical languages.
And so this is the grandfather of the man that you bought them from?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
That's right. The man that I bought them from, Herman Spencer, was his grandfather.
Okay.
And somehow or other, they made it across the country, and I found them up a country dirt road in Dallas, Oregon.
Wow.
Let's take a look at what's in that collection. You know, there are, this is a little bit of education. I don't mean to speak down to any of our listeners, and perhaps they already know this, which is fine, but just for a quick review for some of you that aren't aware of some acronyms that are used in the book business. TLS, ANS, and ALS. And all three of these are contained in this archive. TLS stands for a type letter signed, and that's the letter at the top left that of the memory of Spencer being the Greek teacher. In the center, you see an ANS, an autographed note signed. And right there at the top middle of the page, you'll see what looks like a little bar graph. And it's a bar graph of Page comparing himself to Aeschylus and Sophocles. Quite unsurprising for Ezra Pound. His bar is a little bit shorter than Aeschylus and Sophocles, but I guess he imagined himself being compared in the same breath as other Greek philosophers and authors. And finally, ALS, which is an autograph letter signed. Now, folks, autograph does not imply that it was autographed. Autograph simply means that it was written by hand. So sometimes you'll see these abbreviations on a bookseller's listing, and that's what they stand for.
And that is interesting. An autograph dealer in South Carolina that I have dealt with for about 30 years has a list of these on each of his mail outs or on his listings online, about 20 of these. I think some of them are things he's made up himself, but those are, it's good to know those.
Yeah. Well, for example, also in this collection was a typed note initialed. And I think about calling it a TNI, but I'm not sure that's an official designation.
And some of these sound like there's some strange disease or something, that goes by its initials. But asking about the ephemera is interesting. Just a really quick little story from this week also. I had a customer who bought a document, a land grant, Georgia land grant, that was signed by 2 Georgia governors. And he said that he collected signatures of people who had Georgia counties named for them. Mm-hmm. And there are 159 Georgia counties.
The most of any state in the country?
Yes. And some of them are Cherokee or other Indian names, so they're not all people. And some of them he'll never get, like Button Gwinnett, but so I said, well, I have some others if you'd like me to look. And so I came up with about 16, and of those 12 he did not have. And so I spent a goodly portion of yesterday sorting out autographs and documents, which included a couple of Cherokee land grants, and getting them packaged up for him to ship out this morning. But he said he also collected, but he wasn't doing it anymore because he had most of the ones he could get, free francs of U.S. presidents. And so it's always interesting to see what people have, and he doesn't collect books at all.
Right.
But to see what people have in the paper line, that's not books, and to see what people collect.
And just a tip for our viewers, whether you're buying or you're selling, it never hurts to ask that one final question before we walk away. What else might you have?
Yes.
Well, I have to admit, Lee, I'm not a great aficionado of poetry, but let's bring up that next slide on Ezra Pound. Certainly, he is quite the classical character in poetry, and quite frankly, some people believe that he reinvented poetry, much the same way Pablo Picasso invented paintings, or Renoir, or Rodin reinvented sculpture. He was a minimalist. He eschewed the use of adjectives and adverbs. And it was right about that time of the 20th century when artists, regardless of what their medium was, were becoming minimalist. But he said just as much in fewer words as many others did. Well, he was teaching in college in 1908, and unfortuitously for him, got caught with a woman in his bedroom. So he was promptly fired from the university, from the college, and began to have a bad taste in his mouth for America after that. So he took off to Europe. And while he was in Europe, it was approaching the height of production in his own poetry. Plus, he edited a volume of journals called Poetry. He became fast friends with the like of William Carlos William, Ernest Hemingway, James Joyce, Ford, Maddox Ford. Lee, what is it about these authors that have a first name and a last name? William Carlos Williams and Ford Maddox Ford.
Well, I'm not sure, but I know that nowadays a lot of people are naming their children like that.
Is that right?
Yeah, using family surnames as middle. Well, like my son, Gardner, is my maiden name. But it's sometimes hard when your grandchildren or children come home from school talking about a child's name. You can't decide if it's a boy or a girl. Is that their first name? Is that their last name? And so it's a tradition that I think is picked back up.
Well, I'm sure my children are glad I didn't name them Markiewicz, Nathan Markiewicz.
They're probably very happy about that. They're probably very happy.
Lee, another one of Ezra Pound's good friends was E. Cummings. I think he was somebody that we probably all experienced in high school English class. How about yourself? Are you a poetry fan?
Well, I'm not a great poetry fan, but I do. Cummings died when I was in high school. And so I think maybe we read a little bit more of his than we would have otherwise. And hadn't thought about it in years, but I occasionally read a blog online called The Bitter Southerner by a man named Sean Dietrich. And it's a variety of things. But yesterday there was an article in there that was an obituary that a North Carolina writer, who is also a professor at Western Carolina University, had written about his grandfather. And it was called, it's Obituary of an Ordinary Man. And so last night, when I was looking back at some E. Cummings things, ran across, of course, Anyone Lived in a Pretty House Town, which I think is probably one that, most people who've read any Cummings have read. And the whole approach of that poem was so similar to the approach in this obituary of this man who lived in a small town, who didn't want to make a name for himself, who did everyday things, but who had a good relationship with his wife, a relationship with his family. And, I think that spouse relationship comes out in the Cummings poem. And I just found it an interesting...
Do you have it there in front of you?
Do I have I don't.
The poem? Okay.
I have the Cummings poem, but I don't.
Yeah,
have
read us a few lines. Read us a few more lines.
Okay, I don't. I didn't print all of it, but okay.
Just a stanza.
Okay. Sorry. Anyone lived in a pretty how town with up so floating many bells down. Spring, summer, autumn, winter. He sang his didn't. He danced his did. Women and men, both little and small, cared for anyone not at all. They sowed their isn't, they reaped their same, sun, moon, stars, rain. And one thing that I've always liked about this poem is the way he changed, like, the order of the seasons and the order of sun, moon, rain, and reversed the way you normally see things. And then you've got to figure out who no one is, who anyone is. And it's a poem that makes you sit and think.
And there's an interesting, much like Ezra Pound, there is an adjective, pretty town, in the title, but there weren't many other adjectives in there.
No punctuation.
Yet he still somehow figures out to convey emotion to us.
It does. And there's no punctuation. And I think Cummings would be pleased that people text these days with no capitalization and no punctuation. He was right on the forefront of texting, I think. So it was kind of an odd juxtaposition that suddenly it hit me that what Jeremy Jones was saying in his obituary to his grandfather was very much what, in many ways, this is an obituary. That Cummings was saying in this poem. So,
some people only get their name in the newspaper twice in their
right.
life, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right, there isn't. So it used to be in Calhoun, you got it 3 times because weddings were a big deal around here in the newspaper. Not anymore, but back years ago, you got down to what color underwear you were wearing, if that's what you want to do.
Alan, let's finish up this presentation on Ezra Pound. Let's pull that slide back up again. Well, when people hear Ezra Pound, they think of probably first as his cantos. Cantos plural. Well, what is a canto? A canto is a convenient division of poetry, which was usually sung in the middle and early industrial age, rather than read. There's no specific format. That's why you don't see a lot of punctuation. That's why you don't see the lines and all lining up. Sometimes it's very free form. That's a construction style. It's not limited to any one type of poetry. And perhaps after Pound, or maybe even before Pound, the most famous canto is from the Divine Comedy, which were a little bit more structured, usually 142 lines long. Pound's canto, and I believe there were 130 of them, the ones that he called the Pisan cantos from Pisa, Italy, is the work most often considered that it could stand out alone outside of the other 129 cantos. And it was awarded the first Bollingen Prize in 1948. Well, later, Ezra Pound was said to have gone a little bit mad, and he was really fixated with winning the Nobel Prize for literature. While he accepted the Bollingen Prize, he never thought it was sufficient enough. But his poetry and these cantos have a free fluidness of consciousness. There's small bits and pieces of history and individual biographies built into them. Yet when you look back upon it and when you read it consecutively, there's a lot of unity throughout. And while he was imprisoned, he began to teach himself Chinese and included a great deal of Confucian philosophy in these cantos. But what a interesting individual. He went to Europe and he became a bit of a fascist and anti-Semite. In 1945, he was arrested by the United States Army as a traitor because he made radio broadcasts during the war, was brought back to the United States, impounded at St. Elizabeth Psychiatric Hospital right outside of Washington, D.C., and spent 13 years there until 1958 when he was finally released. He continued to write during his time in the psychiatric hospital, but of course never reached the peak of performance and production as he did in his early years. And I got to say, Lee, I don't think I'm reaching the peak of my production in my early years either.
Well, you've still got many years to go in, so you've still got a chance. We're looking.
Cross my fingers on that.
Yeah, we're looking forward to the peak of your bookbinding production this fall. So.
All right, Lee. It's always fun to check in with you and share a little bit of book ecosphere knowledge with our listeners.
I was able to use that term in talking to the collector of Georgia autographs yesterday. I'll have you know.
Very good. One more reminder before we pass on from the Rare Book Cafe, the coffee break addiction. Starbucks, I'm going to give you one more chance. Give me a call. We'll sign you up. All right, Lee, we'll talk again soon. Thanks a million.
Good to see you.
Carry on.